The invitation arrived on parchment that felt like human skin. I found it slipped beneath my apartment door at 3 in the morning. My name, Nina Greaves, written in what looked suspiciously like dried blood. The paper crackled between my fingers as I read the single line. The lost course awaits. Basement level 1247 North Wabash. Midnight tomorrow. No signature, no return address. Just a small embossed symbol in the corner. A fork piercing what might have been an eye. I should have burned it. Should have called the police, or at least my editor at Underground Dining Quarterly. Instead, I tucked it into my jacket pocket and felt my pulse quicken with that familiar hunger. Not for food, but for the story that would resurrect my career from the grave I dug with my last exposé. It had been 3 years since the Tarrington restaurant scandal broke. 3 years since I'd been blacklisted from every reputable publication in Chicago for revealing that the city's most exclusive dining club served dishes prepared from stolen cadavers. The truth had destroyed 12 careers and landed 4 people in federal prison, but it had also destroyed mine. Nobody wanted to hire the journalist who'd brought down Chicago's culinary elite, no matter how accurate her reporting. But this invitation, this felt different, dangerous in a way that made my journalistic instincts scream. The address led me to a narrow brownstone squeezed between a closed dry cleaner and a storefront with newspapers taped over its windows. The building looked abandoned, but when I pressed the buzzer at exactly midnight, the door clicked open without a word from the intercom. Inside, a narrow staircase descended into darkness. Each step creaked under my weight, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence. The basement opened into a surprisingly elegant dining room. Mahogany-paneled walls lined with bottles of wine that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and a single round table set for 4. 3 other guests had already arrived. Blake Foster lounged in his chair like he owned the place, which he probably could have. Trust fund money and Daddy's pharmaceutical fortune had bought him entry into every exclusive circle in the city. His pale hands drummed against the table's surface as his eyes swept the room with barely contained excitement. Across from him sat Delilah Morse, her black hair pulled back so severely it stretched the skin around her eyes. I'd heard whispers about the mortician's daughter, how she'd been fired from 3 funeral homes for inappropriate conduct with the deceased. She watched me enter with the same clinical detachment she probably reserved for corpses. Our host stood at the head of the table. August Renner, a skeletal man in his 60s whose reputation preceded him like the stench of spoiled meat. Once the most sought-after sommelier in the Midwest, he'd disappeared 5 years ago after allegations surfaced about his private wine cellar. Specifically, what else he'd been aging down there besides vintage Bordeaux. "Nina Greaves," Renner said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The woman who brought truth to light. How appropriate." I took the remaining chair. "Let's skip the pleasantries. What's this about?" Renner smiled, revealing teeth that had been filed to points. "Direct. I appreciate that. You're here because you understand hunger. Real hunger. Not the kind satisfied by ordinary sustenance, but the deeper need that drives us to seek forbidden experiences." He gestured to a covered serving cart in the corner. "Tonight, you'll taste something that has never touched human lips. Something that will change you in ways you cannot imagine." Blake leaned forward, practically salivating. "What kind of meat?" "The kind that remembers," Renner whispered. The lights dimmed to a warm amber glow as Renner wheeled the cart to our table. Beneath the silver cloche lay 4 portions of meat so dark it seemed to absorb light. The flesh glistened with an oily sheen that reflected the candlelight. "The lost course," Renner announced. "Harvested from the deepest wilderness of northern Canada, where ancient things still walk among the pines. The native peoples have stories about creatures like this, beings that exist at the boundary between hunger and madness. Delilah picked up her fork, studying the meat with professional interest. It's still warm. The best dishes are served at body temperature, Renner replied. I lifted my fork, journalist's curiosity overriding every survival instinct screaming in my head. The meat felt dense, almost rubbery, and when I pressed the tines through it, something that looked like black blood seeped onto the plate. Blake was already chewing his first bite, eyes rolled back in ecstasy. Christ, it's incredible, like nothing I've ever tasted. Delilah swallowed her portion methodically, each bite calculated and precise. She hadn't said much since I'd arrived, but now she made soft humming sounds of satisfaction. I hesitated, the fork halfway to my mouth. The smell hit me then, not the rich aroma of cooked meat, but something else. Something that reminded me of morgues and winter nights and the sound of screaming wind through bare branches. Eat, Renner commanded, and his voice carried a weight that made refusal impossible. The meat hit my tongue like an electric shock. Flavors exploded across my palate, iron and salt and something ancient and wild. It tasted like fear made flesh, like the last thoughts of something dying in the snow. I chewed mechanically, unable to stop as warmth spread through my chest and into my limbs. Within minutes, we'd consumed every scrap. Renner watched us with the intensity of a scientist observing lab rats. Excellent. The transformation should begin within hours. I suggest you return to your accommodations and rest. I made it back to my studio apartment as the first wave of nausea hit. My skin felt too tight, like a sweater that had shrunk in the wash. I staggered to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face, catching my reflection in the mirror. My pupils had dilated until only thin rings of iris remained, and something dark pulsed beneath the skin of my neck. The nausea passed, replaced by a different kind of sickness, a hollow, gnawing hunger that food couldn't touch. I tried eating everything in my refrigerator. Leftover pizza, crackers, a pint of ice cream. Nothing helped. The emptiness inside me grew deeper with each bite. By dawn, I couldn't keep my hands steady. My skin had taken on a gray pallor, and when I looked in the mirror, I swore I could see something moving beneath the surface. Dark veins that pulsed with their own rhythm. I called in sick to my freelance gig and spent the day researching, diving deep into folklore databases and academic papers about cannibalistic practices among indigenous peoples. The search led me down increasingly dark paths, accounts of Wendigo psychosis, stories of shape-shifting creatures that haunted the northern wilderness, warnings about flesh that carried curses. The Wendigo, or Wendigo, depending on the source, appeared in dozens of tribal legends. A creature born from cannibalism and winter starvation, driven by insatiable hunger to consume human flesh. But these were myths, stories told around campfires to frighten children. Weren't they? My laptop screen flickered, and for a moment I thought I saw faces in the static. Gaunt, desperate faces with too many teeth. I blinked and the screen returned to normal. My hands shook so badly I could barely type. The hunger grew worse as darkness fell. I found myself standing in front of my neighbor's door, listening to the sounds of their evening routine through the thin walls. My mouth watered, and I had to grip the doorframe to keep from breaking down the door. Something was happening to me. Something fundamental and irreversible. I forced myself back to my computer and continued researching, following citation trails deep into academic papers about tribal traditions and cannibalistic practices. One name kept appearing. Dr. Harrison Drew, an anthropologist who'd spent decades studying Wendigo phenomena before disappearing in the Canadian wilderness 15 years ago. Drew's final paper, published posthumously, contained a chilling warning. The Wendigo curse is not metaphorical. Those who consume the flesh of such creatures do not simply die. They become vessels for something far older and hungrier than human understanding can encompass. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Basement. Now others are changing too. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, then stopped. In the hallway mirror, my reflection looked wrong. My limbs seemed longer than they should be, my fingers more tapered, and my eyes. My eyes had gone completely black. The brownstone's basement had transformed since the previous night. The elegant dining room was gone, replaced by something that looked like a charnel house. Hooks hung from the ceiling, and the walls were lined with what looked like butcher's tools. The air reeked of copper and decay. Blake stood in the center of the room, but he was no longer recognizably human. His skin had taken on a mottled gray color, and his arms had elongated until his knuckles dragged on the floor. He turned when I entered, and I saw that his mouth had split open to accommodate rows of needle-sharp teeth. "Nina," he said, and his voice sounded like wind through dead leaves. "Isn't it wonderful? I can taste everything now. Every fear, every drop of blood. I've never been so alive." Delilah sat in the corner, completely naked, her skin covered in symbols carved deep enough to expose the muscle beneath. She spoke in a language I'd never heard, guttural sounds that seemed to bypass my ears and speak directly to something primitive in my brain. "The moon tells me secrets," she whispered between phrases in that alien tongue. "It shows me where the meat hides." Renner emerged from the shadows, but he looked different now. Younger somehow, though his eyes held depths that seemed infinite. "You're adapting quickly, faster than most." "What did you do to us?" I demanded, though my voice came out as more of a growl. "I gave you what you truly craved. Not food, transformation. You wanted to taste the forbidden, didn't you? To experience something beyond the mundane constraints of human existence?" My hands had become claws without my noticing. When I flexed my fingers, bone-white talons extended from beneath my nails. "You fed us something. Something that wasn't meant to be eaten." "Clever girl. Yes, the meat came from a very special source. My contacts in northern Canada spent months tracking the creature, a genuine Wendigo, bound and weakened by ritual. They thought it was simply another feral human when they butchered it." The hunger hit me like a physical blow, doubling me over. But it wasn't food I craved now. It was something else. Something warm and red and screaming. "But here's what you need to understand," Renner continued, circling me like a predator. "You didn't eat the Wendigo. The Wendigo ate you. From the inside out. What you're becoming isn't human anymore. It's a host, a vessel for something that has walked this earth since the first winter that claimed the first starving soul." Blake laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "So what?" "I feel powerful. I feel alive for the first time in my worthless existence." "Do you?" Renner smiled with those filed teeth. "Or do you feel hungry? Hungrier than you've ever been? Hungry enough to do anything? Eat anything to make it stop?" The truth hit me like ice water. The hunger wasn't separate from the transformation. It was driving it. We weren't becoming Wendigos. We were becoming food for something else. Bait. "The Wendigo spirit needs fresh hosts," I said, the puzzle pieces clicking together. "But it can't possess just anyone. It needs people who've already crossed certain lines, people who've consumed forbidden flesh." "Very good. And now that you've been prepared, others will come. They always do. The scent of transformation draws them like moths to a flame." Through the basement's single window, I saw shapes moving in the alley outside. Tall, angular forms that moved with inhuman grace. More Wendigos, drawn by whatever we were becoming. "How many?" I whispered. "Enough. Chicago has always been a hunting ground. So much meat, so many people who disappear without anyone caring enough to look for them." The shapes outside pressed against the glass. In the darkness, I could make out faces that had once been human, stretched and distorted by whatever lived inside them now. They were waiting for us to complete our transformation, to join their eternal hunt. But I still retained enough of my humanity to be horrified by what I was becoming. Unlike Blake, who capered around the room testing his new strength, or Delilah, who had begun carving fresh symbols into her flesh, I fought against the hunger, fought to maintain some core of myself that remained Nina Greaves, journalist, seeker of truth. "There has to be a way to reverse this," I said. Renner shook his head. "The only cure for Wendigo curse is death. True death, and we're far beyond that point now." "Then why are you still human?" His smile faltered. "Who says I am?" The basement lights flickered and went out. In the darkness, I heard the sound of breaking glass as the creatures outside forced their way in. Blake's inhuman laughter echoed off the walls, joined by Delilah's chanting in that alien tongue. But beneath it all, I heard something else. The sound of Renner moving through the darkness with predatory purpose. When the emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in a hellish red, I saw him crouched in the corner like a spider, his limbs bent at impossible angles. "The truth is," he said, "I've been hosting my own passenger for quite some time, long enough to learn how to feed it properly. And you three, you're just the latest course. The Wendigos that had broken through the window weren't here to welcome us. They were here to harvest us. We weren't joining their pack. We were becoming their next meal." I ran for the stairs as chaos erupted behind me. Blake's screams mixed with Delilah's chanting as the creatures fell upon them. My transformed body moved with inhuman speed, carrying me up the staircase and into the Chicago night. But I knew I couldn't run forever. The hunger was growing stronger, and soon I wouldn't be able to resist it. I would feed, and then I would become what hunted others in the darkness. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my career exposing the truth about forbidden dining experiences, and now I'd become the main course in someone else's restaurant. 3 weeks later, I received another invitation. The parchment felt familiar beneath my fingers, though my sense of touch had changed along with everything else. My name was written in that same dried blood ink, but this time the message was different. "The lost course continues. Your contribution is required. Basement level, 1247 North Wabash. Midnight tonight." I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My transformation was nearly complete now. My skin had taken on that familiar gray pallor, my limbs had elongated, and my teeth had sharpened to points. But somehow, impossibly, I was still me. Still Nina Greaves. The hunger controlled me during the dark hours, when I stalked through Chicago's abandoned places seeking prey. But during the day, when the Wendigo spirit rested, I retained enough humanity to understand what was happening. Renner had been telling the truth about one thing. We were bait. But not in the way I'd originally thought. I made my way back to the brownstone, moving through the shadows with inhuman grace. The basement had been restored to its original elegant state. Mahogany walls, expensive wine, a round table set for 4. 3 new guests sat waiting. A food blogger known for her extreme culinary adventures, a pharmaceutical executive with rumors of human experimentation in his past, and a plastic surgeon who'd been investigated for harvesting organs from unconscious patients. Fresh blood. New hosts for the hunger that lived in the darkness between the stars. Renner stood at the head of the table, smiling with those filed teeth. but now I could see what he was. Not the host, but the source. The original Wendigo, the one that had started this cycle decades ago. He'd found the perfect hunting ground in Chicago's underground dining scene, where the wealthy and depraved would pay any price to taste the forbidden. "Nina," he said as I entered. "Right on time. I trust you've brought the main course?" I looked down at my hands, at the butcher's tools I'd somehow acquired during my 3 weeks of hunting, at the cooler I'd dragged behind me through the city's tunnels. "Fresh from my own ribs," I replied, my voice no longer entirely human. "Just like you requested." The 3 new guests looked at me with eager anticipation, their eyes already showing the first signs of that familiar dilation. They had no idea what they were about to consume, no idea that they were the real meal. As I began preparing the lost course, carved from my own transformed flesh, which would regenerate before morning, I wondered if this was how it had always been. An endless cycle of hunger and consumption, predator and prey switching roles with each new moon. I placed the first portion in front of the food blogger, watching her eyes light up with greedy excitement. She raised her fork to her mouth, and I felt something that might have been my soul finally die. The Wendigo spirit whispered in the darkness between my thoughts. "Welcome home." And somewhere in the city above, another invitation was being slipped beneath another door, written in ink that looked suspiciously like dried blood.